Welcome to the Garden Talk podcast, where we interview growers from all over the world, both beginners and experts, seeking to learn more about what they know about gardening and how they do things in their garden. All right, here we go. I'm joined with Kim from Couple of Plants. How you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I hope you're doing well as well.
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for asking, and thanks for coming on the podcast. Today, we're going to talk about building the perfect living soil mix, if that exists. I don't know if it does, but we're going to talk about it. All things living soil. You actually own a company that creates living soil, and you have so much knowledge about that, amendments, just organic growing in general. So this is going to be a great conversation. Before we dig into the topic, can you give us a quick snapshot of your background and kind of what makes this topic such a strong focus for you?
Sure. Perhaps I should start with my professional background, which originally began in a completely different field, I have to say. I completed my training as a geriatric nurse, actually, and worked in elderly care for several years. After that, I went through another apprenticeship to become a special care needs caregiver. During this time, I worked for several years with people with disabilities before eventually joining a public school where I was working as a social worker, focusing on the so-called, I guess, difficult cases with young people with rather chaotic or somewhat tragic backgrounds. The reason I became interested in living soil, however, has a completely different origin. I have been suffering from cluster headaches since the age of 19, which occur episodically for about 3 to 4 months each year. And during these periods, daily life becomes extremely challenging for me. Actually, I can experience up to 8 attacks a day, each lasting between 45 minutes and 2 hours. And the pain can reach a 10 out of 10 on the pain scale from the doctor. So it really needs special care and is quite challenging for me. And naturally, over the years, I was prescribed a wide variety of medications to manage my condition, but nearly or pretty much all of them came with side effects I didn't want to accept long term. And that's why I started to look for alternative healing methods and medicinal plants. And through friends and experiences I noticed that certain medicinal plants helped me between the attacks and even reduced the pressure on my left eye, which is pretty much the epicenter of the pain during my attacks. And this made the pain between the episodes somewhat tolerable, or I was able to tolerate it somewhat. And also the plants, the medicinal plants, helped me to sleep more easily or fall asleep much quicker, which is very important for me because the light sleep phase is actually the main trigger for my attacks. So one could imagine that I get no rest during these periods because every time I want to sleep, it's pretty much the highest risk of getting another attack that keeps me awake again. So medicinal plants help me here, and that's pretty much the reason I got interested in living soil, because early on, about 14 years ago, I've began cultivating organically to supply myself. And I didn't want to interact with the black market because I've made some really bad experiences there. So over time, I explored different cultivation styles, including mineral-based nutrition, just to get a better grasp of how different systems work. And later on, concepts like Terra Preta and pretty much a lot of English content about regenerative cultivation eventually led me to the topic of living soil, a concept that immediately fascinated me. And around 7 to 8 years ago, I then started to create my own mixes, experimenting and comparing them to established recipes such as those from Clackamas Coots, for example. Since I had access to a wide variety of different materials and resources, I immediately began to develop my own blends with my own stuff, combining various approaches and trying to refine them over time. And this process really drew me in completely. And to this day, I'm still working with great passion on improving my products and creating a foundation that enables people to grow medicinal plants in a healthy and truly natural way.
Man, that's awesome. So much experience. And it's not easy to build soil because there's going to be a certain balance. And of course, it depends on what plant you're growing and so on and so forth. But man, a lot of that stuff goes way over my head. Being a soil scientist in order to determine the right ratio and how things break down and stuff, there's a lot to it. I think a lot of people underestimate that. I think a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll just blindly mix things together. and then ask why it's not working.
Exactly.
There's a lot more to it, and we're going to get into quite a bit of that in this episode. But first, before we continue this episode, I want to give thanks to our sponsors who help make this podcast possible. Thanks to AC Infinity for sponsoring this episode. Check out their all-in-one pH pen, which measures pH, EC, TDS, and temperature. The sensor probe is replaceable, and it comes with storage solution and calibration solutions. Click the link in the description section below so you can learn more about their all-in-one pH pen, and the discount code MrGrowIt15 works on both Amazon and their website, acinfinity.com. Stash Blend. Several additives in one blend, so you no longer have to buy individual bottles. Check it out at stashblend.com, link in the description section below, and use the discount code THESTASH. Spider Farmer. Spider Farmer's Black Friday sale is live right now from November 20th to December 1st. Save up to 30% off plus special gifts and deals. Control your grow anytime, anywhere with the GGS Smart System. It's app-powered and help makes indoor growing easy. Spider Farmer offers everything you need for indoor gardening, from LED grow lights to grow accessories, and they have more new products on the way. Click the link in the description section below for more information, and you can use discount code MrGrowIt5 on their website, spider-farmer.com. I've got to ask, what's in your living soil mix?
Sure. Currently, I do offer two main living soil mixes. One that is peat-based and another one that is entirely peat-free, using Coco Coir, in preparation for the EU's planned peat ban expected by 2030. So I really have to prepare a bit because in the European Union by 2030, I won't be able to sell or buy any peat-based products anymore. So that's why I started to create different mixes without peat. And the peat-based version is the more common one here, the one growers are pretty much familiar with. I carefully prepare and lime the peat by hand using different types of lime to adjust the pH and the mineral balance. Then I combine it with 3 distinct kinds of rock dust in a specific ratio. And then I add my own biochar. Biochar is a very important ingredient in my formula for me personally because it really enhances microbial colonization and the nutrient exchange while also serving as an excellent long-term nutrient reservoir. I've noticed that overall growth and health of the plants were substantially improved after I found out how to correctly activate and incorporate biochar into my soil mixes. And together with warm castings and pumice for aeration, these ingredients form the heart of my base mix, which I then use to create my own living soil. And using the base mix, I then, after letting it cook and adjust the pH, integrate a diverse range of natural materials such as seaweed meal, ground oats, sprouted seeds, neem cake, grape pomace, vinous, and much more, together with a few select animal-based inputs for stuff like phosphorus, for example. And I really try to pay close attention to both nutrient diversity and biological compatibility to ensure that the soil truly becomes living afterwards. I then inoculate and propagate a wide variety of bacteria and mycorrhizae and trichoderma fungi, and even nematodes and stuff that directly go into my mix. And this process then cultivates dense microbial life that forms a thriving ecosystem ready to connect with plant roots, effectively bridging the soil food web from day one and giving the plant access to everything the soil has to offer almost instantly.
Man, that's crazy that there's going to be a ban on peat, and that's right around the corner. I didn't realize that was actually happening and that it's so close. So yeah, it's smart for you to start to make adjustments now, right? Because it's not going to be available forever. Now, getting into the peat versus cocoa, now this is something that's always a hot topic. It's like, what's better to use, peat or cocoa? Now, there's so many differences between the two. I have personal preferences on which one I like, but I want to hear from you. Can you talk to us about peat versus cocoa?
Sure. Peat versus cocoa, both are widely used foundations for living soil blends. Some even use both in the same mixture and mix them or combine them, yet their chemistry and their long-term behavior differ greatly, which, in my opinion, offers some different use cases for each one of them. Peat moss, for example, really excels in structural stability, buffering capacity, and nutrient retention when properly and sufficiently limed. It also forms a medium very rich in calcium and magnesium, offering a very high stability in pH and acting as a lasting nutrient reserve, which makes it ideal for long-term living soil systems, in my opinion, and systems that especially run with rainwater or osmosis water that don't come with a lot of minerals. Due to its very low pH, it is possible to use a lot of calcium and magnesium because we need that much to actually raise the pH of the peat to an acceptable level of around 6.5, which is pretty much the sweet spot when growing certain medicinal plants. And because we go deeper and deeper when extracting the peat from the bog, the pH actually gets more and more acidic. So nowadays, the peat I personally use tends actually to be at a pH around 3.5. Which allows me to use even more calcium and magnesium, which is sort of a good thing, I guess. If I were to use the same amount of lime with Coco Coir, I would run into a lot of different issues really quickly, as the pH of the substrate would be way too high, and therefore nutrient uptake would be massively limited. Certain nutrients wouldn't be able to be taken up by the plants, and as a result, we wouldn't be able to grow good and healthy plants in that mixture. Coco Coir is, on the other hand, sustainable and highly aerated, and it is very easy to rehydrate compared to peat, which can become hydrophobic once it gets really dry, making watering eventually a bit more challenging in certain cases. Coco is pretty much neutral in pH, ranging from about 5.5 to 6.5 in most cases, and as I said, is sustainable. So it makes it a somewhat eco-friendly alternative, though it lacks peat's strong self-buffering effect and reserve function, because we can't, as I stated, use nearly as much calcium and magnesium as we would when using peat. Coco Coir is often described as a more sustainable way than peat moss because it comes from coconut husks. That's a byproduct of the coconut industry. However, it's not entirely environmentally harmless, I guess. Processing and transporting Coco Coir, usually from tropical regions, require large amounts of water to wash it and make it suitable, and also a lot of fossil fuels to transport it, which increases its carbon footprint and can pollute local waterways. So it's not an easy win on that side for cocoa, at least in my opinion, in my personal opinion. So in short, peat moss damages the peat box over time, and it releases the stored carbon, which is not a good thing, while Coco Coir's long-distance shipping and washing processes consume a lot of resources and energy, while also leaving some pollution. So in practice, peat-based soils, comparing those two, in my opinion, perform best in long-term systems, living soil systems, while Coco Coir systems or Coco Coir blends usually work better in short-cycled or controlled setups, in my opinion. Each material has its place, I guess, and it really depends on the grower and the goal of each grower, what they should use, I guess. So, for example, when growing autoflowers, I've noticed that they tend to grow a bit better in Coco Coir-based mixes, as they often offer slightly better aeration and lower nutrient density, which is an environment that fits autoflowers a bit better. Meanwhile, in peat-based systems that run, that it can easily be maintained over a longer time and doesn't need as much maintenance as Coco Coir does, which oftentimes fits photoperiodic plants a bit better.
Man, so much good information there. You have explained a lot in regards to peat versus cocoa, and you did it in a very simple manner, so thank you for that. I love peat. I really do love growing in peat. I've been growing in peat. I had a mix that I used for 14 years, and it was peat-heavy mix, Fox Farm Ocean Forest soil for anyone who's wondering. But since then, I have changed over. Now, although I do like peat because it does have a higher CEC, cation exchange capacity, the ability, really in layman's terms, to as a magnet kind of hold on to those nutrients, right? Cocoa is very forgiving when it comes to watering, right? Also, I like how there's so much aeration in there. It's a game changer. So I've actually transferred over to bioflower soil. It's by Bio 365, and that's more cocoa heavy. And what a difference in growth. It's incredible. The amount, just the added oxygen down in the root zone, which a lot of people don't think about, it increases growth so much. Although I was a peat heavy person in the past,
Mhm.
now my medium's cocoa heavy because I really do like that. And one thing I want to kind of mention here is there's a misconception on cocoa to where some folks are like, okay, I'm using cocoa and some form of aeration, whether it be like perlite or whatever. Okay, great. So your medium's inert at that point. But when you're adding in things such as not only aeration, but also compost, worm casting, fertilizer, well, at that point, it's no longer inert, right? It's more of a soil at that point. I think a lot of people get tripped up, especially when it comes to pH, because they think, okay, I need to be, between 5.5 and 6.0 or something lower than a normal soil would be because they're in cocoa heavy.
Mhm.
Although you can certainly get away with once you've turned it into a soil and have compost, worm castings, fertilizer, all that stuff, you can get away with a little bit higher of a pH. You talk to us about pH between the differences of peat versus cocoa?
Sure, I've got the feeling that peat has a bit more buffering capacity, which means that I feel like you have a bit higher range to work with. Everything between 6.0 and 7.0 is basically, for our use case, pretty much okay. I personally made the experience that Coco Coir, on the other hand, I mean, I'm aiming for the same pH ratio because once it gets too acidic, certain nutrients can't be taken up, or it is much harder for the microbial life to buffer it to make it plant available. So liming is still a thing in Coco Coir, even though because its pH is neutral from the get go, you don't have to do as much. Still, you have to supply the soil with certain limes to a different degree, I guess. So it does play a role, and I'm still aiming for the same pH range in Coco Coir as I do when using peat based. So that's actually a thing to keep in mind. So I know that some growers actually try to not tinker too much with the Coco Coir and aim for a 5.5 or 6.0 pH also when watering. But I've made the experience that actually you want to aim for around about the same pH when going with peat. Just the watering schedule and everything changes a bit because when you go from Coco Coir, you really have to water different. As you said, it's kind of a different thing. The water retention, the aeration plays a huge role here, and that's pretty much what you have to take into account, I guess.
Got it. And then when it comes to peat, there's not just one type, there's multiple types, right? Can you explain to us the difference between white peat versus black peat?
Yeah, sure. So white peat is the younger part. It's still around like 5,000 years old. It gets extracted in a peat bog, and it's taken from the upper layers, basically the younger layers, and it is very lightly decomposed and visibly fibrous, so you can really see and feel the fibers. It is also very low in humic acids and very low in nutrients altogether. It is very airy, so therefore it's excellent in terms of drainage and quick water exchange. So it's pretty much ideal for seedlings and very sensitive root systems. It is naturally acidic from around 3.0 to 4.5, depends on what layer it got extracted from. But it is, as I said, really easy to lime and buffer. So the peat I use, I said, is a bit more acidic right now, but these features can't be found in any other material, which makes peat kind of unique in my opinion. We do use substitute nowadays, like Coco Coir, but these come with totally different characteristics and therefore need to be handled differently. And the soil mixture needs to be adapted a bit to compensate for that. And one can't lime these as much, as I said. So the overall function and of these substitutes we use do differ quite a bit. Black peat, on the other hand, is extracted from the lower layers. It's older than the blonde peat or white peat. It's usually up to 10,000 years old. It is very heavily decomposed in comparison to the white peat, which makes it very good to absorb moisture slowly but consistently, and it stabilizes the substrate. Also, it is higher in pH, around 5.0 to 6.0. and comes with a very strong CEC, so cation exchangeability, what you've already described earlier on. That means it can hold on to nutrients much better and also release them to the plant in an available form. So it really helps to helps the fertility of the soil, I guess. So in modern soil design, a lot of soils do use both black and white peat combined because they really complement each other pretty well. So over the years, I personally found that I don't really need to rely on black peat. I'm only using white peat, as I found that the additions I use in my soil mix really make up for all the good stuff black peat does. So it basically became ineffective for me. I don't need to use it anymore. And I also try to reduce the usage of peat in general as far as possible without really compromising on the performance, because the performance, for me at least, is my highest priority. And if I can achieve the same results without the peat, or with less peat, or in general with better resources, then of course I would try to do so.
Understood. And I know there are some less common types of peat, like brown peat, or reed, or sludge peat, or woody peat. Are any of those worth using at all when it comes to kind of growing medicinal plants, kind of being in a mix for that?
I mean, I guess worth to use, yes, at some point, but I don't feel like they are necessary at any point. I've tried certain stuff, but I've always came back to the white peat and the black peat. And now over the years, when refining my mix, as I've stated before, I found that even black peat can be completely left out the mix. But I'm still searching for a very good alternative to white peat. As I said, it's really hard to find the same characteristics in any other materials, which allows so much calcium and magnesium to be put into the soil without any issues. So for me, it's white peat, and the rest, personally, I don't need to use them. I think you can use substitutes with the same effect and the same performance, I guess.
And then I know for aeration, you mentioned you use pumice. Why would you use pumice? And also, is there any other forms of aeration that you use in any of your mixes, whether it be perlite, vermiculite, lava rock, or do you just use the pumice?
I've actually tried pretty much every one of those that you've just counted, or that you just told me. Vermiculite, lava rock, but pumice is the one I've really stuck with, because pumice is, first of all, it's light, but it doesn't float to the top, which is a very positive thing, especially when you make living soil at a scale and you need to ship the stuff, and everything that increases the weight of your package, first of all, is a bad thing because it increases transportation costs. So I was looking for something that is rather light, but not as light as perlite, because a lot of people do use perlite also, but I made the experience that perlite floats to the top over time, especially when you water in by hand or stuff, then the perlite will be coming to the top over time, and that destroys the structure in your soil and the aeration. So pumice, on the other hand, doesn't do that. You can water your mixes, and pumice stays where it is, providing the structural benefits, and also due to its porosity and the aeration, it also is a very good house for all the microbes that try to attach to the pumice. So it really helps in this regard as well. Although it's more expensive than perlite, it's far more durable, and making it a great investment in both structural stability and biological balance. Other aeration forms are possible as well, but mainly for me, pumice I stuck with because of its weight and stuff. So you could also use lava rock, which is also very porous. It's a bit more heavy, but it basically does the same stuff. Vermiculite is something I personally stopped from using. I didn't like the texture as much. I didn't like the look as much, but it does quite a good job as well. But for me, in living soil, I think pumice seems to be the best option.
Yeah, water retention is another thing that can be spoken about when it comes to these types of variations. Some can hold more water than others. I actually just got a bunch of lava rock and put it into my living soil mix that I've been reusing over and over again for 7 grows now. and plants are doing fantastic. But I did add quite a bit of weight to the pots.
Yes, it makes
But I
up
wanted
a huge difference.
yeah, it makes a huge difference. And although I added some weight, I know that it did add in the aeration and also the microbe habitat. So I think overall in the long term it's a really benefit for me to use that. I've yet to use pumice. I think I'm gonna probably try that one out next.
Try pumice. I think you'd like it as well.
Yeah. Now how about compost? I went over your website and looked through some of your living soil mixes, and I believe some of them do have compost in it. Can you kind of break down what compost you use?
So my main compost source is actually high quality worm casting, so vermicompost, so to say. I'm not using regular compost. I'm going to explain why, but vermicompost really serves as the biological foundation of all my soils here. I stopped using industrial compost years ago, despite its easy availability, because it often disrupts microbial harmony in my soil due to the heat processing it went through, as well as its residue contamination. At least here in Germany, it's a thing. The residue contamination, oftentimes chemicals and similar stuff, seem to really negatively impact the soil biology, at least in my cases, and disrupt certain processes that led to an overall less desirable outcome in terms of soil health and fertility. Instead, I rely on premium worm castings paired with high-quality microbial inoculants, and this combination ensures high consistency for me, efficient decomposition, and resilient fertility while still being able to scale. Since I have to be able to produce and meet my demand, I need something that I can scale with. And my traditional garden compost can certainly be very beneficial and definitely is a good thing. I found that vermicompost is a far more predictable and refined thing for living soil at scale, at least. And with the right inoculants and methods, I can really achieve the same quality without the need for homemade fresh compost, which is only available in limited quantities. Also, if I were to use homemade compost, I would need to ensure that the quality always meets a certain requirement. And on top of that, is made out of the same ingredients all the time. So I do not have different outcomes when using that compost as the main ingredients in my mix. But every home grower out there using my mixes or generally using living soil is of course free to incorporate their own compost in a small portion, because the more biodiverse your soil mix is, the more stable it will run. And when used responsibly, it's always good to add more biological diversity in your mix. And living soil really requires a wide variety of different bacteria, fungi, and organisms in general to be able to support itself and run or operate in a rather closed loop. So every member of the soil food web should be present in any shape or form to ensure that the food chain or the soil food web is not interrupted. And compost can really help to supply that.
Understood. And when it comes to worm castings, one of the things that I think you hear about different people having different ratios that they add in. You know, some people are going to say, oh, okay, I add 10% to my mix. Other people are going to say 20%. Some people say 33% of their mix is worm castings. And this kind of goes back to the Coots mix, which you mentioned, 1 to 1 to 1, you know, one part being like Peat or Coco, one part being aeration, one part being either worm castings or compost. Is it 33% of worm castings that you add into your mix, or is there a lower percentage that you add in?
What the first years when I started started experimenting also with, in comparison to the Clackamas Coots mix, I also aimed for around 1/3, but over the years I dropped it more and more because I found that I get a lot more benefits when reducing the organic side a bit, the organic matter, to increase aeration and stuff and retention and different kinds of beneficial things, because too much organic matter is also a bad thing, I guess. I wouldn't go above 33%. That usually leads to issues, and too less, like if you have like under 10% is something I wouldn't go as well. So anything between 10 and 33% can work. Depends on the rest of your mix. Depends on how much nutrients you are adding afterwards, because vermicompost or worm castings come with a lot of micro and macronutrients. And if you overdo it, of course, then it's not a good thing. You need to keep a balance. So it depends on how much you put in terms of vermicompost and how much nutrients you add afterwards. So anything between 10 and 33% basically should be fine in most cases.
That makes sense. I know a lot of people use it during the grow as well. They will do some sort of top dressing, for example, like an inch layer of top dressing of forecast, or 2 inch layer I've heard of people doing. I like to just kind of do 1 cup with a scoop of fertilizer that I use. And I really think it works well with just about any all natural organic inputs that you can add in. Now, getting into fertilizer, what ingredients make up your fertilizer? You already kind of mentioned a little bit about some like seaweed and neem cake, and there was a handful of things, but can you kind of break it down for us? What's in your fertilizer?
Sure. All the fertilizers I use come from natural and renewable resources. My base blends include things like seaweed meal, humic compounds, multiple types of rock dust to maintain a broad mineral diversity, I guess. And I also combine both plant-based and animal-based organic fertilizers to try to provide a rather full spectrum nutrient profile. Every ingredient is carefully selected by me, not just to feed the plant, but more importantly to nourish the organisms that power the soil metabolism. That's what keeps the living soil system alive. You want to feed the microorganisms and not the plant directly. That's the difference in living soil. So over the years, I've tested different organic fertilizers and as well as single components and ingredients, and also as a form of top dressing when growing my living soil. I'm that kind of guy that really needs to do everything himself. I need to try out things. I need to make mistakes. And I need to see how these components interact with my soil and the plant in order to really grasp the concept and learn from it. I'm the learning by doing type of guy. So the ingredients I use, therefore, mainly stem from a background of trial and error with the resources I had easiest access to and not necessarily the ones that are most typical for living soil. Currently, I'm also finalizing a blend design for top dressing to replenish, like a mineral-based blend to replenish elements such as calcium and magnesium, which is made out of rock dust, calcified seaweed, gypsum, and all that kind of stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask you how you apply the fertilizer throughout the grow. So the fertilizers you mentioned are just in kind of the living soil that you created, and you're working on a fertilizer for top dressing. Now, what do you do current state? Eventually, the nutrients that are in that medium are going to deplete. How do you do feedings throughout the rest of the grow cycle?
So in most cases, I apply the fertilizer as a top dressing. I gently work it into the top layer of the soil and then water it in. That ensures minimal disturbance to the mycorrhizal and microbial networks in the soil. It can also be used to rejuvenate or replenish depleted soil, and you can use it to mix it in when amending your soil or when mixing it up for the next cycle. You can do that as well, of course. But top dressing remains my personally preferred approach because it respects and preserves the ongoing natural processes within the soil, I guess. And in living soil systems, disturbance should always be minimized as much as you can. Tilting or turning, in that case, or in that regard, breaks fungal networks and disrupts the soil's established ecosystem. So the core principle is pretty simple. Feed the soil, not the plant, and the soil will take care of the rest. And also leave the soil as it is. Don't start turning everything after each grow if it's not necessary. Mother Nature will do the rest if you provide the right basis, I guess.
I know you're in Germany, and we do have quite a few people that are in Germany, and they tune into my content. Shout out to you. Throw something down in the chat if you're one of them. Is there a particular brand fertilizer, or a list of brands that you can kind of just generally recommend that people can check out?
Yeah, I mean, in Germany, it's called, for example, DCM. DCM is a group. The thing is that most of these fertilizers are only available at bigger scale because they only sell towards businesses or agricultural businesses. So you only can buy those things in like 25 kilo bags. Sure, there are other companies that offer great products at a smaller scale, but I'm not too familiar with the smaller scale stuff because I'm so much focused on my own stuff. But if you want to get a lot of fertilizer, then I can, for example, can say DCM is a good way to do things, but there's also lots of other stuff. I mean, yeah, it's hard for me now to list it up because I'm so in focus of my own stuff that I'm not really familiar with the small package designs, but I know that a lot of different companies do great stuff, and you don't really have to rely on my products per se. You can use a lot of different products. Just make sure it's organic. Just make sure it's the right fit, and you do your research, and then it should be fine.
Understood. All right, let's get into cover crops. Now, this is something that is often advised to do alongside your regular fertilization program because there are many benefits to cover crops. Do you use cover crops at all? If so, which ones?
Sure. Yeah, I do use cover crops quite frequently, actually, and I even consider them a cornerstone of soil health, basically. The only exceptions are when space is very limited, or if the soil will only be used for a short cycle. In those cases, a mulch layer alone can already be very effective and do the job, I guess. Especially when working with earthworms, though, in bigger sized containers, cover crops become even more valuable, in my opinion, because once trimmed, the plants provide continuous organic matter and food for the worms, which then drag it into the soil and they feed on it there. And while doing so, they improve overall soil structure, drainage, the aeration, and in the end, they offer plant available macro and micronutrients for the plants, which is very beneficial. And cover crops really help to do that and feed constant organic matter together with all the chop and drop. Like if you make a defoliation from your medicinal plants and put the leaves on top, all this is food for the earthworms together with the cover crops that really help to keep the system at balance. And also, while feeding on the cover crop and or the organic matter, they promote lots of different bacteria that also play an important role in soil health, because bacteria and fungi make up the base of the food chain, basically. And it is very important to always have a healthy population going in terms of bacteria and fungi in your soil, because everything else is built on these cornerstones, on these fundamentals. And when your fundamentals are right, if you have enough microbial and bacterial populations, then everything else will be much more healthy as well. And cover crops do a significant bit here. They really promote different bacteria, they promote different fungi, and keep everything at balance, I guess. So every system of a certain size should incorporate cover crops, in my opinion, and earthworms together with some mulch. When growing indoors, though, I prefer species like Phacelia or ryegrass, which germinate very quickly, and they do form dense root masses and can be trimmed repeatedly, which is a good thing to maintain the exudate production in the root zone and act as a constant source of food for the bacteria and the earthworms. Outdoors, however, clover seems to be the best fit, in my opinion, because it fixes nitrogen from the atmosphere in symbiosis with rhizobia bacteria, which are typically found outside in abundance. So they really come towards the clover. They colonize the root zone, and then they help to fix the nitrogen out of the atmosphere, basically acting as a form of nitrogen fertilizer. Once you cut down the clover, the cover crop, it gets released into the soil and the other plants can take it up. So it's a misconception. Oftentimes people think that once you use companion plants or cover crops, that they drain nutrients out of the soil and they are contradictory to your use case. But actually it's the opposite. If you use the right cover crop and the right plants, then you can enhance your soil health and nutrient availability.
Free nitrogen from the air. Some of these cover crops give, like you mentioned, right?
Yeah, basically free, yes.
I'm glad you mentioned that the clover has to be kind of cut down in order for it to kind of be released.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people think that, hey, the clover is growing, nitrogen's automatically being available, but no, it has to actually be killed off. So chop and drop or whatever you want to do, cutting that down. It would be good to layer it over so you have kind of mulch layer, but at that point it releases the nitrogen from, I don't know what it's called, like little balls, little bulbs in the roots.
Ligomi, I have the German word, but I don't know the English translation actually. Like in German, it's Leguminosen. I don't know something similar in English, I guess.
But I absolutely love the amount of really aeration it can provide into the
Yes.
medium. Like it makes things so loose. And I remember the first time using cover crop, it was clover, and putting a moisture meter down in there. It just pierced through the medium just like
Yeah.
butter. And maybe me being in a more dry environment and often doing dry backs, drought stress, whatever, it adds to a lot of compaction, right?
Yes.
And of course, that's going to lead to less oxygen in that soil and kind of can stunt growth if the soil is too compact. So I personally love having a cover crop because it does help loosen everything up. It's a huge win for me.
Especially when you re-amend and use the soil over and over again, things get more and more compact. And you, as I said, you don't want to break it, you don't want to till it. So cover crops really help to, in a natural way, loosen things up again and aerate stuff. Look for drainage, make drainage better, and really, they are really, really helpful. I think people underestimate the use of cover crops.
Yeah, I also love the moisture retention property of it. And, that's something that I think you mentioned that you can get with a mulch layer. And let's talk about mulch layers next. Do you use a mulch layer at all? If so, what do you prefer?
Yes, so basically that goes hand in hand, I guess, because mulch can be made out of different stuff. You could use warm castings, you could plastic, cardboard, everything can act as a mulch layer, but also cover crops and chop and drop methods do provide a mulch layer just with green mulch. And I usually apply a balanced mixture of green mulch, so fresh cover crop droppings, and brown mulch, which is woody materials like branches and shredded leaves and stuff. And this combination promotes an optimal carbon to nitrogen ratio and a supportive environment for beneficial fungi and bacteria. And that's what we are aiming for, especially when growing certain medicinal plants. The ratio of brown and green mulch is optimal at around 1:1. And the reason for this is that the green mulch feeds the bacteria due to its carbohydrates and simple sugars, which the bacteria can really quickly break down. On the other hand, brown mulch feeds the fungi in the soil because the fungi are specialized on decomposing stuff like wood and everything, which takes, I guess, a bit more work to decompose. That's a part for fungi to do. And if you apply 1:1 ratios of each, then you are feeding the bacteria as well as the fungi. And especially when growing certain plants, you want to shift it a bit from vegetative phase towards the flowering phase. While in the vegetative phase, you would want to lean a bit more towards the green mulch side, promoting more bacterial growth. While in flower, you want to ensure that you are leaning a bit more on the heavily fungi side, on the brown mulch side. The other important function of mulch is the moisture retention or regulation, preventing the soil from drying out. Also, the cover crop, when used together with mulch, helps to wick up the moisture in the upper layers of the soil as well, and really just protect the microbial habitats just below the surface of the mulch. So you can basically, as I've stated before, you can, if you don't use cover crop or you don't have anything like that, you could use basically everything else as long as it doesn't leach any chemicals or so into the soil. You can use cardboard, you could use plastic sheeting, you could use basically everything you got on hand. Just make sure it offers like the moisture retention in the soil, like it holds the moisture, it doesn't let it evaporate. And that helps the living soil to really function properly.
I've used cardboard in the past, like you mentioned, and I know some people are concerned about forever chemicals being part of the cardboard. Now, I can't really speak to that, but figured I'd bring that up if people are using cardboard or interested in using cardboard. You might want to dig a little bit deeper and see if that is actually a risk or not. I know not all cardboard is created equal, but nowadays I'm using barley straw and it works very well. But that's another thing that really helps with moisture retention. Living in a very dry climate, for me, having that sun or the grow light, the light from the grow light come directly onto the soil, it just dries up that top layer. And that's where all the fertilizer and amendments are, right? That's what you need to be moist in order for the microbes to
Exactly.
be active on it and breaking down that organic matter, mineralization and nutrient cycling and turning them to a form that can be usable for the plants to uptake. So yeah, mulch layers, cover crops. I'm a big fan of both of them. Now I want to get into IPM next. Now pests. When it comes to organic growing, you get a lot of people that are concerned about pests. They see things moving, bugs, and some people assume that they're all bad. Other people realize that, hey, some of these are beneficial. What do you typically do in order to, say, deter or kill off the bad and keep the good?
Well, there's different methods, but my approach to IPN or integrated pest management is first of all based on prevention, observation, and biological balance, I guess one could say, not the reaction itself. So I try to not react, I try to prevent. So I see it as an ongoing dialogue between environment, soil, and plant rather than a fight against pests alone. So for me, IPN isn't about eliminating every pest, but about creating conditions where they can't really dominate or disrupt the natural balance they are in. So I start with prevention in terms of like soil health, and if the soil is healthy, biologically active, and well structured, most pests problems never really appear in the first place. Proper aeration, moisture regulation, and biodiversity make the entire ecosystem more resistant. If you are waterlogged, for example, if you're overwatered, then that promotes all the bad stuff. It promotes like flies, it promotes anaerobic bacteria, and once you really found the balance and you have a healthy, biologically active soil, then it gets harder and harder for all the bad stuff to come into your system and stay there. So living soil systems already host a plethora of beneficial microorganisms, fungi, and even insects that keep populations at bay and under control long term. So cover crops, especially, for example, and companion plants like basil, for example. Basil can deter pests like thrips and mosquitoes. If you have a living soil system together with some beneficial companion plants, then that helps also to deter pests. But also important is, of course, the observation and the consistent monitoring of your plants. I personally regularly check the leaf undersides, the soil surface, as well as the canopy levels to detect any early infestations or maybe any potential imbalance, because it isn't not necessarily, you don't have to see a fly first to be sure that you have a problem. If your plants are showing other signs of stress, like nutrient stress or overwatering stress, then that's already the first indication for you to act accordingly and to prepare for an eventual pest, because the soil health and the plant health isn't optimal, so they are more prone to pest at all. So the healthier the plants are, the less likely it is for any pest to come and stay. So chemical products or sprays are always my very last resort or last option, and only if organically certified and used in a precisely targeted way. So most of the time, if I see any pests like thrips or so, I try to work with beneficials like Bacillus thuringiensis or beneficial nematodes, and I apply them into my soil. And if you really keep your eye on the soil and keep everything healthy, then it should usually go away from alone, more or less.
I feel like fungus gnats is arguably the most common one that people battle, and that population can get out of control quick. Do you have any
Yeah.
tips for battling fungus gnats?
My pronunciation might be botched, but the Bacillus thuringiensis is a way of dealing with it immediately and very quickly, because it destroys the larvae in a couple of hours. Also, nematodes can help really good. So if you have an outbreak of fungus gnats, first of all, make sure your soil isn't too wet, because fungus gnats really love wet soil. So if you are constantly overwatering or you're on the wet side, then try to reduce it a bit. If you apply nematodes, though, you need to keep the soil at a certain moisture so the nematodes can work. I would also suggest you to apply nematodes at least 2 times, like once at the start after the Bacillus thuringiensis, if you want to combine them, and then maybe a week or 2 weeks later, and then keep a close eye on your soil and the moisture in your soil. And if you do a good job, then they should go away. Also, maybe I want to add, if you mix your own soil and you have a fungus gnat infestation, it can be an indication of over-enrichment of organic matter. So it could be that you put too much organic matter into your soil, or maybe too much cover crop, too much mulch. That can be a factor as well. All that stuff can promote fungus gnats.
Definitely some good tips there. Now, you mentioned adding in microbes to the soil in order to help combat those pests. I got to ask, just generally speaking, people are adding in these microbial inoculants pretty often in order to help break down those organic amendments. How often should microbial inoculants be added to the soil?
So first of all, maybe important to know for those who don't know, it's virtually impossible to overdose most microbial inoculants, but timing and consistency really matter a lot and can save you a lot of time and also a lot of money. Because, for example, if you use any like mycorrhizal fungi, any products like mycorrhizal fungi, they are best applied at the very early stage, maybe directly at the seed germination phase or at transplanting when using young plants, because once the symbiosis is established and the mycorrhizal fungi have attached to the root system of the plant, they don't go away anymore unless the plant dies. So if you germinate your seeds and you immediately apply stuff like mycorrhizal fungi, the symbiosis is active immediately and the fungi will grow together with the plant. So you don't have to reapply mycorrhizal fungi later on if you already did it early on. And if you do it early on, then of course you can save a lot of money because you only need a tiny bit of that product. While later on, if you want to immediately cover the whole root system, you would need to sprinkle a lot more in. So just be mindful of how you do it. And if you do it early on and then you keep your soil and your plants healthy, you don't have to reapply most of them. There is stuff like effective microorganisms or compost tea that can actually be added frequently, and I do that as well, like especially at the start of a season or after environmental stresses like drought or waterlogging. It makes sense to boost the good microbes, the good bacteria and fungi with the help of compost teas or effective microorganisms or plant extracts. All these kinds of stuff you can apply frequently. Just don't overdo it, and you will have a healthy soil, and you don't have to use all the inoculants like the mycorrhizal fungi and stuff over and over again.
Good to know. Now, taking a step back and looking at the entire picture of mixing soil, what do you think most growers get wrong when they try to mix their own soil?
Yeah, I mean, a very common mistake, and one I made myself quite a bit early on, is really the over-enriching. Means putting too much organic matter, too much nutrients into your soil mix. It's a mistake I've made over and over again at the beginning, and it's very tempting because many growers believe that because a nutrient source is organic, you can't really overdo it. But that's not really true. Excessive amendments often can disrupt the microbial life and the equilibrium, I guess, leading to deficiencies and toxicities in the soil. Also, another frequent problem, I guess, is relying too heavily on online recipes. They can serve a general guideline, but they don't really explain the underlying soil dynamics. And without that knowledge, it's really difficult to diagnose issues and to prevent issues in the first place, or to maintain your mix successfully. So some knowledge at least is required to successfully use these recipes, in my personal opinion. And also very important, at least for me, is patience. Patience is very essential when growing in living soil or when mixing your own soil, because freshly mixed soil needs to go through a biological, cooking phase, I guess, a period to stabilize before actually plants go in there. If you plant plants or if you skip that phase, it can really lead to unpredictable outcomes and nutrient behavior and pH swings, which then lead to massive issues with your plants, and they are really hard to fix afterwards. So keep a close eye on how much you put in. Be patient. Let the soil cook. And lastly, for me personally, two of the most overlooked factors are aeration and pH balance. Poor airflow in the soil leads to anaerobic zones, anaerobic bacteria, while acidification can lock up nutrients despite their presence. Even if you have enough nutrients in there, if the pH isn't right, the plant can't take them up. The microbial life can't make it available. So a well-crafted soil breathes, self-regulates, and responds dynamically to care. And that only happens when these fundamentals are properly managed.
Well said. Yeah, like I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, it's not easy to mix your own soil, and that's one reason why I leave it up to the professionals, people who know what they're doing.
Patience is also pretty hard sometimes.
Yeah.
We want to start growing right away. We want to mix your soil. We want to harvest. But patience really pays off a lot of times there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't count the amount of growers who have reached out to me and posted like on my forum, for example, and they had mentioned, okay, I've got this in my soil, and I'm added in this, and they're listing off all these organic amendments. They're like, and I don't understand why my plant is struggling. It's like, well, I don't either, because you've got all these different ratios, all these different amendments. It's impossible for me to give you an answer on why your plant isn't performing well in that soil. So oftentimes it is safe to just start with the pre-mixed soil, living soil. You make one, Build a Soil makes one, Kiss Organics makes some. There are many different mixes out there that work successfully, that were created by professionals. So I personally recommend people kind of start there, and then as they continue on their knowledge, maybe they can add things in first to those soils as the grow goes on and stuff. But yeah, mixing your own soil and getting the ratios right and knowing the breakdowns of the different amendments and so on and so forth there's a lot to it. And I think a lot of people underestimate that. So anyways, thanks for your time today, kind of sitting down, breaking this down for us. I think there's a lot of good information here that people are really going to take in. I want to give you an opportunity now to tell the listeners where they can find you. And do you have any upcoming projects or kind of releases that you got going on that you want to talk about?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. Was a pleasure. You can find me on YouTube. I got a German channel for all the German viewers out there. Greetings to Germany, and as well as an English channel, which is pretty new. I try to translate everything I do into English, so the English audience also has some content. Regarding upcoming releases and projects, there's always a lot to come, I guess. I have several grows coming up, including ones with mutant seeds, for example, as well as regular genetics from the US. And of course, I do educational videos on my channel regarding living soil, so stay tuned to see what's coming. It definitely will be interesting.
I'll definitely have a link to Kim's channel down in the YouTube description section below, so you can easily access his channel, subscribe to his channel, all that good stuff. I want to give a thanks to the folks that support on Patreon, patreon.com/MrGrowit. 100% of what is donated through Patreon goes right back into the podcast. You really help keep this podcast going, so thank you so much for your support. And the folks being scrolled on the screen right now are in the producer tier. Special thanks to you for your contributions. Kim, once again, thanks for coming on, man. This has been very insightful for me and my audience as well. So thank you so much, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, same. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.
Peace out, everyone. Catch you in the next episode. Thanks for tuning into that episode, and thanks to Mars Hydro for being a sponsor. Check out their Black Friday sale, which is going on right now. Save up to 30% on many of their products, including their intelligent system. Their iHub Pro, iControl, and environmental sensors can help automate and monitor light, temperature, humidity, and CO2. They also just launched an auto drainage system, which provides smart water management, directing water from grow bags to trays, then to a collection box. Go to the website at mars-hydro.com. I'll link it in the description section below, and you can use discount code MrGrowit